"You have 4 days," the steward said, and he said it the way someone slides a knife across a table, flat, unhurried, certain the blade will be picked up. I stood with my hands behind my back and my jaw locked, because both were habits I had learned in the first week and had not been allowed to forget. The steward's name was Voren Kale, and he had the narrow, blue-veined face of a man whose authority had never been questioned by anyone who mattered. He did not look at me when he spoke. He looked past me at the wall, as though addressing the architecture. 4 days until the convocation of accord. The Empress consort must appear. She must speak the renewal vow. She must stand at the cerulean altar and confirm her bond to the throne. If she does not, the marriage compact dissolves by imperial statute, and he paused. The pause was not for breath. It was a pause designed to let the next word arrive like a stone dropped from height. "You are deported." "I understand," I said. "Do you?" He turned a page in the ledger he carried, a heavy thing bound in pale leather, its pages edged with silver. "Your wife will not speak to you. She has barred you from the East Wing, the Solar Gallery, and the consort's court. She has instructed her personal guard to escort you from any chamber she enters. The kitchens have been informed that your meal ration is to be delivered to your quarters, not to the dining hall, and that you are to eat alone. These are not my orders, Consort Hale. They are hers. I am aware." 4 days. He closed the ledger with a sound like a small, deliberate verdict. "I suggest you use them." He left. The door sealed behind him with the quiet hiss of Kithori engineering, pressurized, climate-locked, designed to keep the inside and the outside from ever touching. I stood in the corridor for a count of 10, because standing still in the face of a threat was one of the few dignities they had not yet stripped from me, and then I turned and walked back toward the only room in the palace that still permitted my presence. My name is Declan Hale. I am 38 years old, Terran-born, former engineering sergeant with the 9th Combined Task Force, and for the past 14 months I have been the legally wedded consort of Empress Siren of the Kithori Protectorate. She hates me. I need to be precise about that, because precision is the only weapon a man in my position can carry without being disarmed. She does not dislike me. She does not find me inconvenient or irritating. She hates me with the thorough, architectural hatred of a woman who was given no choice in a matter that should have been entirely hers, and who has spent every day since the wedding ceremony making certain. I understand that my presence in her palace is a wound she endures, but will never accept. The marriage was not her idea. It was not mine. It was the product of a treaty clause buried in the annexes of the Thalassian Accord, Article 77, subsection 14, paragraph 3, a provision inserted by diplomats who had been awake for 52 hours and were drafting language to end a war that had killed 11 million sentient beings across 4 systems. The clause required a binding union of persons between a Terran national and a member of the Kithori imperial house to cement the peace. Both governments agreed. Neither government asked the persons involved. I was selected because I was available, unmarried, held the appropriate security clearance, and had served 3 rotations in Kithori space during the conflict, long enough to understand the language, the customs, and the particular way the Kithori regarded humans, which was the way a surgeon regards an instrument, useful when needed, stored when not. Siren was selected because she was the Empress. There was no one else. The wedding had taken place in the Hall of Voices, the great domed chamber at the heart of the Kithori capital palace, where the acoustics were so precise that a whisper at the altar could be heard in the last row of the gallery. I had stood in formal Terran dress, dark jacket, pressed trousers, polished boots, beside a woman 7 inches taller than me, her skin the color of deep twilight blue, her hair a cascade of dark copper that fell to her waist in elaborate ceremonial braids threaded with thin silver chains. Her eyes were the amber of old resin, warm in color, utterly cold in expression. She had looked through me during the vows with the focused blankness of someone cataloging the distance between where she was and where she wanted to be. The officiant had asked if she consented. She had said yes. The single syllable landed in the acoustic perfection of the hall of voices like a coin dropped into an empty well, small, precise, falling a long way down. She had not spoken to me again for 3 weeks after that. I had spent those 3 weeks learning the rules. Not the formal ones, those were in the treaty documents, and I had memorized them before arrival. The informal ones. The ones that governed the actual texture of daily existence inside a palace that considered my species a minor footnote in a negotiation. Rule 1. Obey. I do not mean obey the Empress. She would not give me direct orders, because giving me orders would require acknowledging that I existed in a capacity other than a contractual obligation. I mean obey the system, the palace staff, the protocol officers, the stewards, the guards, the scheduling clerks, the dietary supervisors, the wardrobe attendants, the 6-person etiquette committee that had been assigned to ensure I did not embarrass the throne by standing incorrectly, eating incorrectly, breathing at the wrong cadence during formal audiences, or looking at the Empress with an expression that could be interpreted as familiar. I obeyed everything. I stood where they told me to stand. I wore what they told me to wear, Kithori court dress, which was designed for bodies taller, leaner, and bluer than mine, and which made me look like a man attending a funeral for someone he had never met. I ate what they put in front of me, which was nutritionally adequate and emotionally indifferent. I walked the corridors they designated for consort transit, a secondary network of passageways that ran parallel to the main halls but never intersected them, so that I could move through the palace without ever crossing the Empress's sightline unless scheduled to do so. I attended the functions I was required to attend. I stood behind her left shoulder at state dinners, silent and still. I accompanied her to the Gallery of Accord for treaty anniversary observances, walking 3 paces behind. I sat in the designated consort's alcove during sessions of the imperial court, a small recessed bench beside a pillar where I could see the proceedings, but could not be seen by anyone in the gallery unless they turned specifically to look. Nobody turned to look. I was the human in the room, the only human in every room I entered, and my presence was treated with the same polite indifference as a piece of furniture that had arrived with a diplomatic shipment and could not be returned without paperwork. 14 months. I had obeyed for 14 months. And now I had 4 days. Day 4, 3 remaining. I found her schedule through Mevin, the one member of the palace staff who spoke to me as though I were a person, rather than a treaty appendix. Mevin was a junior archivist, barely out of academy, with the wide gray-green eyes and the silver-streaked hair typical of the lesser Kithori houses. She had been assigned to the consort's records office, which was a polite way of saying she filed documents that no one read in a room that no one visited. The Empress has a session with the War Council at mid-morning, Mevin said, pulling up the schedule on her datapad with the furtive efficiency of someone doing something she should not be doing. Then a private audience with Ambassador Thesic at 14th bell. After that, a review of the border fleet deployments with her admiralty. She is in the garden now. The garden. The cerulean walk. It is, she hesitated, choosing her words with the care of someone navigating between discretion and honesty. It is where she goes when she does not wish to be the Empress. I found the cerulean walk through the East Service corridor, one of the passageways I was technically not barred from, because nobody had thought to bar it. The garden was a long, narrow courtyard enclosed by high walls of pale stone, open to the sky, planted with rows of the blue-flowering veil trees the Kithori cultivated for their scent. The flowers smelled like cold rain and distant wood smoke, and something else I had never found a word for, something clean and private and faintly sad, like the memory of a room you once felt safe in. Sirene was standing at the far end, her back to me, her hands resting on the stone balustrade that overlooked the lower terrace. She wore a simple robe, no ceremonial braids, no silver chains, no imperial sigil, just dark fabric and copper hair loose over her shoulders. She looked smaller without the throne's architecture around her, not diminished, unburdened, as though the version of her that existed without the crown was the one that still remembered how to breathe. I stopped at the entrance. I did not approach. "You are not permitted here," she said without turning. "The prohibition covers the East Wing, the Solar Gallery, and the Consort's Court. The Cerulean Walk is not listed." A pause. I could see her shoulders tighten, the muscles along her neck drawing taut, the way they did when something landed that she had not expected. "I will have it added." "That is your right." Silence. The veil trees moved in a faint wind, their blue petals drifting down to the stone walkway like slow rain. I stayed where I was. I had learned that the fastest way to be removed from a room was to move toward the center of it uninvited. "What do you want, Consort Hale?" "To ask one question." "No." "Then I will leave." I turned. I had taken 3 steps toward the corridor when her voice stopped me, not louder, not sharper, but carrying the particular edge of someone who has spoken before they could decide not to. "What question?" I turned back. She still had not looked at me. Her hands were tight on the balustrade, the tendons visible under her twilight blue skin, the small muscles along her forearms drawn into cords. "The convocation is in 3 days. If you do not speak the renewal vow, the compact dissolves. You know this." "I am aware of the terms of my own subjugation." "Then my question is simple. Do you want the compact to dissolve?" Silence. The kind that fills a space the way water fills a vessel completely, finding every corner. I waited. I was good at waiting. 14 months of standing in alcoves and walking parallel corridors had made me a scholar of patience, an engineer of remaining present without pressing. "What I want," she said quietly, "has never been the relevant variable." I left. That was enough for one day. Day 3. 2 remaining. The palace hummed with preparation for the convocation. I watched it from the margins. The stewards directing the arrangement of the great altar cloth, the ceremonial guards polishing their armor to a mirror finish, the protocol officers rehearsing the sequence of vows with the focused intensity of people who understood that a mispronounced syllable could become a diplomatic incident. The Hall of Voices was being transformed into a stage for the renewal of a bond that one of its principals despised, and the other had been trained to endure. I spent the early morning in the consort's quarters, a suite of 3 rooms on the upper level of the West Annex, tastefully furnished and utterly impersonal. The furniture was good. The linens were clean. The window looked out onto a secondary courtyard where supply deliveries arrived at dawn. It was the room of a guest who had been invited to stay and then systematically forgotten. I repaired the water recirculation unit in the washroom, because it had been making a clicking noise for 6 weeks and nobody had come to fix it. I am an engineering sergeant. I fix things. When everything else in a man's life is beyond his control, the ability to identify a fault and correct it is not a small comfort. It is the entire foundation on which he stands. At midday, Mevan arrived with a datapad and an expression that was somewhere between concern and conspiracy. "There is a problem," she said. "There is always a problem." "A specific one." "The convocation requires both parties to speak the renewal vow." "Both. The consort's vow is separate from the Empress's. You have not been given the text." "I assumed it would be provided." "It will not be. Steward Kale has instructed the protocol office to withhold the consort's vow text until the morning of the convocation. If you do not know the words, you cannot speak them. If you cannot speak them, the compact dissolves, and the dissolution appears to be your failure, not the Empress's." I looked at her. "That is deliberate." "Very, and there is more." She pulled a second document onto the screen, a filing notice from the court of precedent, stamped with the administrative seal. 8 days ago, Kale filed a motion to reclassify your consort status from bonded active to bonded provisional. If it passes, and the ruling is expected the morning after the convocation, even a successful renewal would reduce your standing to a ceremonial appointment with no residential rights. You could be housed outside the palace permanently. The marriage would remain legal, but you would have no more presence in this building than a portrait that has been moved to storage. I sat with that for a moment. 2 walls. If I failed to appear, the compact dissolved outright. If I appeared and spoke the vow successfully, the reclassification stripped the victory of substance. Kale had engineered a corridor with no exits, the kind of design that looks like architecture but is actually a cage. When was the motion filed? The 7th of this quarter, through the administrative review channel, which reports to the steward's office, not to the throne directly. So she does not know. Does the Empress know? Meven's expression shifted, a slight narrowing of her gray-green eyes, a tightness at the mouth that I had come to recognize as the look of a junior official who understood more about the machinery of power than her rank should have permitted. She had grown up in the lower administrative echelons, the child of a clerk and a transit engineer, and she understood the way information moved through the palace, the way I understood the way current moved through a circuit, which paths were clean, which were corroded, and which had been deliberately cut. The Empress knows what Steward Kale tells her. Steward Kale tells her what serves Steward Kale. And what does Kale's service look like? 31 years of shaping the throne's information to match his preferences. He was the one who drafted the original prohibition list, the rooms you cannot enter, the corridors you cannot walk. The Empress signed the orders, but the architecture of your isolation is his design. He believes the compact is a contamination. His word. He told the senior staff at a closed briefing in your 2nd week that the human presence in the imperial house was a temporary contamination that would be resolved by the first convocation. I sat with that. The word landed where it was meant to, in the center of the chest, where a man keeps the things he does not say out loud because saying them would give them more weight than they deserve. Can you get me the vow text? I can. I have access to the archival copies, but if Kale discovers I provided it, my position here ends. Not reassignment, dismissal. The lower houses do not recover from that. I will not ask you to risk that. She set the datapad on the table between us and slid it toward me with one finger. Her hand was steady. Her eyes were not. They held the particular brightness of someone acting against their own survival, because their sense of justice had outgrown their sense of caution. You did not ask, I am choosing. The vow text was 12 lines. Kithori formal register, the old court dialect, every syllable weighted. I memorized it in an hour. I spent a second hour working on the pronunciation, because Kithori vowels sat differently in a human mouth. The open sounds lived further back in the throat. The consonants required a tongue position that felt like learning to hold a pen with the wrong hand. I practiced until my jaw ached, and the words came without thought, because the vow deserved to be spoken as though it belonged in my mouth. That afternoon, I did something I had not done in 14 months. I broke a rule. The east corridor that led to the Empress's private study was guarded by 2 members of her personal detail, tall Kithori soldiers in deep blue armor, faces professionally blank, sidearms holstered at the hip. They had standing orders to prevent my approach. I walked toward them anyway. Consort Hale, you are not. I have information regarding the convocation that the Empress must hear before tomorrow. It concerns Steward Kale's instructions to the protocol office. It is a matter that affects the integrity of the ceremony. The guards exchanged a glance, the universal silent conversation of 2 professionals encountering a situation their orders did not anticipate. I stood still. I did not posture. I did not raise my voice or invoke rank or treaty provisions or the inherent dignity of my position as a husband addressing his wife. I simply stood and waited, because I had learned that a man who stands quietly in front of a closed door with a clear statement and no visible anger is harder to dismiss than one who demands entry. 30 seconds, 40, a minute. One guard entered the study. I heard voices, low, rapid Kithori, the sharp exchange of a subordinate delivering unexpected information, and a superior deciding whether the disruption was worth acknowledging. A pause that stretched. The guard returned. "You have 2 minutes." The study was smaller than I expected, a private working room, not a ceremonial one. Warm light from wall-mounted fixtures that simulated the quality of afternoon sun. Shelves of bound documents and data crystals lining every wall. A desk of dark polished stone, its surface covered with the organized disorder of a working sovereign, maps, communiques, supply reports, intelligence briefs, a half-empty cup of the pale tea the Kithori drank in the evenings, a stylus resting across an open document as though she had set it down mid-sentence. Siren sat behind the desk. She looked up when I entered, and for one unguarded moment, a fraction of a second, the space between one heartbeat and the next, I saw her expression before she could assemble it. Not hatred, not indifference, exhaustion. The deep, structural exhaustion of a woman carrying a weight she had never been permitted to set down, and had long since stopped believing anyone would offer to share. She assembled the mask. It was quick, practiced, the work of a lifetime of sovereign training. But I had seen what was underneath, and what was underneath was not what I had expected. "Speak," she said. "Two matters. First, Steward Kale has instructed the protocol office to withhold the consort's vow text until the morning of the convocation. The intent is to ensure I cannot speak the vow, causing the compact to dissolve in a manner that attributes the failure to me rather than to the throne." Her jaw tightened, a fractional movement barely visible, but I had been watching for 14 months. "And the second. 8 days ago, Kale filed a motion with the Court of Precedent to reclassify my consort status to bonded provisional. If it passes, I can be housed outside the palace regardless of the convocation's outcome. The motion was filed through the administrative review channel. It was not brought to your attention." The stillness that followed was different from the garden silence. This was the stillness of a sovereign who has just learned that someone in her own house has been building walls she did not authorize. Her amber eyes did not leave mine, and in them I saw something I had not seen directed at me in 14 months, focused attention, not the attention of hatred, not the attention of indifference. The attention of a woman recalculating every assumption she had made about who was shaping her decisions. "How do you know this?" "That is not relevant. I will decide what is relevant in my own study, Consort Hale. Then I will tell you that the source is someone in your staff who believes you deserve to make decisions based on accurate information, rather than information curated to serve someone else's preferences. That is all I will say on the matter." Silence. She leaned back in her chair. The exhaustion showed again at the edges around her eyes, in the set of her mouth, in the way her hands lay flat on the desk as though she were holding herself upright through the surface beneath her. "You could have let it happen," she said. The words came slowly as though she were examining each one for hidden mechanisms. "You could have said nothing. The compact dissolves. You go home. You are free of this palace. You are free of—" She stopped. The words she did not say hung in the air like smoke. "Yes." "Then why?" I looked at her. I looked at her directly, without the careful oblique gaze that 14 months of protocol had trained into me, and I spoke the only true thing I had, the one thing that no amount of obedience or isolation or parallel corridors had managed to erode. "Because you should have the choice. Not Kale, not the treaty, not the protocol office. You. If the compact dissolves, it should be because you decided it with full knowledge, with clear intent, as a sovereign exercising her will. Not because someone made the decision for you while you were looking somewhere else. She did not speak. Her eyes, amber, old resin, warm in color, held mine for a count that I did not measure because measuring would have reduced it to something smaller than it was. "Leave," she said. I left, but the word she used was not the one she had used before. The first time, in the garden, she had said it like a door closing. This time she said it like someone setting down a weight she was not yet ready to examine, but intended to return to. That evening, as I returned to my quarters through the secondary corridor, I passed a window that overlooked the administrative courtyard. Below, in the amber light of the wall-mounted fixtures, Steward Cale stood with two senior protocol officers. Their body language was unmistakable, the rigid posture of men receiving instructions they did not question and did not fully understand. Cale's hands moved as he spoke, precise gestures marking off points on a schedule, and even at this distance I could read the architecture of what he was building. The convocation was his construction. Every element, the timing, the escort sequence, the preparation chamber, the sealed doors, had been placed with the same compulsive precision that governed his office and his ledger and his 31 years of service. I watched for 90 seconds. Then I continued to my quarters, sat on the edge of the bed that was always made and never shared, and considered the shape of the problem the way I would consider a system schematic. Inputs, outputs, failure points, the single component whose removal would change everything. The single component was not Cale. Cale was a symptom, a man who had confused his stewardship with ownership, the way a maintenance engineer might confuse a building's needs with his own preferences. The single component was the sealed door. Everything else, the withheld vow, the reclassification, the parallel corridors, the 14 months of invisibility, was upstream of the door. If the door opened, the system changed. Day 2, 1 remaining. Steward Cale summoned me to his office at 9th bell. The office was on the administrative level, a long, narrow room paneled in pale wood, every surface organized with the compulsive precision of a man who believed disorder was a moral failing. Certificates of service lined one wall, 31 years of them, each framed in the same dark border, each bearing the seal of the throne he had shaped and reshaped according to his own specifications. He stood behind his desk. The silver-edged ledger was open. His narrow face carried the particular satisfaction of someone who is about to deliver a punishment disguised as procedure. "The Empress has informed me that you are aware of the protocol office's scheduling regarding the consort's vow text." "I am." "You obtained this information improperly, through channels unauthorized by the palace administration." "I obtained it." His jaw tightened. A thin blue vein pulsed at his temple, the single visible crack in his composure, the tell that 31 years of practice had not managed to eliminate. "Furthermore," he continued, his voice dropping to the register men use when they believe they hold the final card, "the Empress has ordered the vow text provided to you. I have complied. But the escort arrangements for the ceremony are a protocol matter, and protocol remains under my authority. You will be escorted to the preparation chamber at the 15th bell and released for the ceremony at the 16th bell, if, and only if, the protocol sequence permits it." I heard what he said. I also heard what he did not say. The preparation chamber, released if the protocol sequence permits. He was going to lock me in a room and leave me there while the ceremony proceeded without me. "I understand the arrangement," I said. He studied me, the narrow eyes moving across my face the way a man reads a diagnostic, searching for the indicator that would tell him whether the system was going to cooperate or resist. I gave him nothing. 14 months of obedience had taught me how to present a surface that revealed exactly what I chose to reveal and nothing more. "I have served this throne for 31 years, Consort Hale," I served the Empress's mother. I served her grandmother before her. I have navigated this court through 2 succession crises, a trade war, and the Thalassian conflict itself. I preserved the continuity of the Kithori imperial house when empires larger and older than ours collapsed around us. You are a treaty footnote, a placeholder inserted into the imperial bloodline by foreign diplomats who do not understand what this throne requires. I understand. You understand nothing. He placed both hands flat on the desk and leaned forward. You are not Kithori. You do not comprehend what the bond compact means, what the renewal vow demands. It is not a bureaucratic exercise. It is a sacred affirmation that the sovereign and her consort share a bond of recognized worth. Recognized. The word means something in our language that it does not mean in yours. It means I have weighed you and found you present. It means I have looked at you and seen a person, not a function. The Empress cannot speak that vow for a consort she does not recognize. And she does not recognize you. She has never recognized you. You are furniture. You are a clause made flesh. And in 2 days the convocation will confirm what everyone in this palace already knows, that this compact is hollow and you do not belong here. I stood in front of his desk with my hands behind my back and my jaw locked, and I let every word land where he aimed it, because a man who has been hit learns to tell the difference between a blow that carries weight and a blow that carries only intention. Kale's words were sharp. They were practiced, but they were the words of a man defending a position, not stating a truth. There is a difference. A defending man aims for the chest. A truthful man does not need to aim at all. Is that all? I said. The vein at his temple pulsed harder. He had expected the blow to land. It had landed, but I was still standing, and a man who remains standing after the blow is a different kind of problem than a man who falls. Get out. I got out. I went to the workshop. The palace had a maintenance section on the lower level, a series of rooms housing the mechanical and engineering systems that kept the building's climate controls, water recycling, power distribution, and atmospheric processors functioning. It was the operational spine of a building that presented itself to the world as art and architecture and ancient ceremony. And underneath was pipe and wire and calibration, and the honest labor of keeping things working. In 14 months, I had visited it 11 times. The first visit was curiosity. The clicking noise in my washroom led me to investigate the building's water pressure infrastructure. The second was pragmatism. I fixed the clicking myself, because no one was going to fix it for me. By the 5th visit, the chief engineer had started leaving components on the workbench with handwritten notes describing faults and a question mark at the bottom. The chief engineer was a Kithori woman named Thesson, older, with the silver-gray skin of the northern houses and the permanent squint of someone who spent her life reading diagnostic displays in dim light. She had greeted my first visit with suspicion, my second with guarded tolerance, and by the 5th she had begun treating me with the quiet respect that one competent tradesperson extends to another, regardless of species or rank or the politics of the building they share. I had fixed every component she left: a water pressure regulator with a cracked diaphragm, a climate sensor throwing false readings because of a corroded contact pin, 3 atmospheric processor valves that had been installed backward during a renovation 2 years ago and had been operating at 60% efficiency ever since. The kind of error that nobody notices because nobody looks, and the building compensates by working harder in ways that shorten every other system's lifespan. A power distribution junction that was arcing intermittently in a way that would have eventually started a fire in the walls of the administrative wing, possibly during a session of the imperial court. I fixed that one on a Tuesday and did not tell anyone. A fire in the administrative wing would have been dramatic and politically useful to certain parties, and I did not want the credit. The shield generator on the east wing is fluctuating, Thesson said when I arrived. I submitted a maintenance request to Steward Kale's office 4 months ago. It was classified as non-critical and deferred. Show me. She showed me. The fluctuation was in the secondary harmonic, a rhythmic variance in the shield's containment field that produced a low, persistent hum, not loud enough to hear from the corridors, loud enough to hear from the rooms directly above. The East Wing, the Empress's private chambers. She can hear this, I said. Every night. It is worse during low-power cycling, which occurs between midnight and dawn. She has been listening to this hum while trying to sleep. For 4 months, since my maintenance request was denied. I spent 5 hours on the shield generator's control housing. The access panel was in a crawl space beneath the East Wing's foundation level, a narrow tunnel barely wide enough for my shoulders, lit by maintenance strips that had faded to the amber of dying batteries. The fault was a crystalline resonator that had drifted out of calibration, a 40-minute fix if you had the right tools and understood the harmonic mathematics, a 10-minute diagnosis if you did not overthink it. But the crawl space had also revealed 3 other issues: a corroded junction in the secondary power conduit, a coolant line with a microfracture that was leaking at a rate so slow it would take another 8 months to become critical, and a structural fastener on the generator housing itself that had been cross-threaded during installation and was slowly backing out under vibration stress. I fixed all 4. The hum stopped. I emerged from the crawl space with grease on my hands and dust in my hair, and a small satisfaction that sat in my chest like a stone placed precisely where it belonged. Thesson watched me replace the final housing panel with an expression I could not read, or rather, an expression I could read but did not want to name, because naming it would make it heavier than either of us needed. The Empress's household does not acknowledge your contributions to this facility, she said. I am aware. I acknowledge them. Thank you, Thesson. She nodded once, the Kithari nod that carried more weight than a Terran handshake, more formality than a salute, more warmth than either, and returned to her work. That evening I sat in my quarters and read the consort's vow text one more time, 12 lines, each line a statement of recognition, not love, not devotion, not possession. Recognition. I see you. I see what you carry. I will stand where I am placed, but I will not vanish. Each line had a counterpart in the sovereign's vow, a call and response, the 2 halves of a conversation that was meant to be spoken by 2 people who had chosen each other. We had not chosen each other, but the words did not require us to have chosen. They required us to see. And seeing, the act of looking at another person and registering that they are real, that they carry weight, that their presence in a room changes the room, that I could do. I had been doing it for 14 months. Day 1, the convocation. The Hall of Voices was full. I could feel it from the preparation chamber where I waited, the weight of bodies and breath and expectation pressing against the sealed doors like a tide. Delegations from 7 allied worlds, the full imperial court, the ceremonial guard in their mirror-polished armor standing at parade rest along the hall's perimeter, the protocol officers in their formal gray, the press corps in the observation gallery, recording devices primed. Every seat in the 7 tiers of the gallery was filled. Every eye was about to be on the altar. I wore the consort's formal dress, dark blue fabric, silver thread along the seams, a high collar that pressed against the back of my neck like a hand steadying me. I had been fitted for it 11 months ago and had worn it once, at a state dinner where I stood behind Siren's left shoulder for 4 hours without speaking or being spoken to. It fit better now. I had lost weight, not dramatically, but in the steady, consistent way a man does when he eats alone in a room designed for one, and spends his evenings with work instead of company. The preparation chamber was quiet, a single bench, a mirror I did not use, the sealed doors. I waited. The ceremony was scheduled to begin at the 16th bell. The 16th bell came. The 17th bell came. Nobody opened the doors. Nobody came to escort me. Nobody sent word. The convocation was proceeding without me. I understood it instantly, the clean, bureaucratic elegance of the thing. The vow text had been provided because the Empress had ordered it, but the escort had not been arranged because the escort was a protocol function and protocol answered to Kale. I would wait in the preparation chamber, alone and uninformed, while the ceremony proceeded. The Empress would stand at the cerulean altar and wait for a consort who did not appear. The vow would go unspoken. The compact would dissolve. And the record, the only version of events that anyone would acknowledge, would show that the consort had failed to present himself for the ceremony. Not that he had been sealed in a room and left there. 14 months of obedience. 14 months of standing where they told me, walking where they directed, eating alone, sleeping alone, existing in the margins of a palace that had treated me as a footnote and was now attempting to erase the footnote entirely. 14 months of following every rule, honoring every protocol, absorbing every indignity with the steady, lockjaw discipline of a man who had decided that obedience was the price of keeping the peace. I looked at the sealed door. I am an engineering sergeant. I fix things. I fixed the door. The lock was a standard Kithori pressure seal, magnetic clamps, atmospheric sensors, a control panel recessed into the wall behind a decorative cover. I had repaired 3 identical units in the lower maintenance corridors. I pulled the decorative cover, exposed the panel, identified the atmospheric sensor relay, the component that would detect a pressure change if the door opened and would trigger a security alert, and bypassed it with a bridge wire from the small tool roll I had started carrying in my breast pocket 3 months ago. Not because I anticipated this, because I had learned that preparedness is not paranoia when the building itself has been turned against you. I triggered the manual release. The magnetic clamps disengaged with a heavy, satisfying thunk. The door opened. I walked through 2 corridors, past a junior steward who froze with a tray of ceremonial candles in her hands. Her eyes wide as the consort she had been told was secured in the preparation chamber walked past her with the steady, unhurried stride of a man who was not running, not demanding, not making a scene, just walking toward the place he was supposed to be. Past a guard post, 2 soldiers reached for their sidearms. I stopped. I showed them my hands, empty, open, palms forward, the universal gesture of a man who is not a threat. They saw the consort's formal dress. They saw the silver thread and the high collar and the steady eyes of a man who had served 3 combat rotations and understood that the distance between violence and composure was measured in breath. They let me pass. The doors to the Hall of Voices were closed. They were not locked because they were ceremonial doors, and ceremonial doors in Kithori culture are never locked. The Hall of Voices must always remain accessible to anyone who has words to speak. It was one of the oldest laws of the Protectorate, inscribed in the foundation stone of the original palace 5,000 years ago, reinforced in every subsequent charter. Even Kale, with his 31 years and his silver-edged ledger, could not override a law older than the throne he served. I placed my hands on the doors. I pushed. 700 heads turned. The sound in the hall, the murmur of delegations, the rustle of formal garments, the low breathing of a crowd performing the solemn business of watching a ceremony, stopped. The acoustic perfection of the domed ceiling took the silence and held it, amplified it, turned it into a thing with weight and shape and presence, so that the entire chamber held its breath at once like a single organism that had just registered something unexpected. I walked. The aisle was long, 40 meters of polished stone floor that reflected the light from the high windows in pale ribbons. My boots made a sound on it, steady, measured, the cadence of a man who had walked through things worse than 700 staring faces and emerged on the other side with his bearing intact. I did not hurry. I did not slow. I walked the way a soldier walks when the ground is uncertain but the direction is clear. Sirene was at the altar. She stood in full imperial regalia, the ceremonial gown of deep indigo silk, the silver circlet resting on her brow like a sentence she could not put down, the copper hair braided and threaded with chains of office. She was magnificent. She was also completely alone. No consort at her left side. No one standing at the position where the compact required me to be. She watched me approach. I could see her face change as I walked, the mask she wore for the court, the composed imperial expression she had practiced, until it was architecture itself, shifting. Not collapsing, shifting. The way a wall shifts when someone removes the single stone that was bearing all the weight, and the wall does not fall but rearranges itself around the space that stone left behind. Her eyes tracked me from the doors to the first pillar, from the first pillar to the midpoint, from the midpoint to the base of the altar steps. Her lips parted, not to speak, to breathe, as though she had been holding her breath for 14 months and had only now been given permission to stop. I climbed the altar steps. I took my position at her left side. I faced the court. In the front row of the gallery, Steward Cale stood with his ledger clutched against his chest, his narrow face the color of old bone. I did not look at him. I looked forward, at the cerulean altar, at the words inscribed in silver script on the blue stone surface. At the ceremony I had been told I did not belong in by a man who had spent 31 years confusing his preferences with the throne's needs. The officiant, an elderly Kithari woman in ceremonial white, her hands steady despite her age, her voice the rich low register that the hall's acoustics were designed to carry, began the renewal sequence. The Empress spoke first. The sovereign's vow was formal, measured, each word placed with precision into the acoustic space. I listened to her voice, truly listened. The first time I had heard her speak at length in the same room where I stood without a wall or a sealed door between us. It was lower than I remembered from the wedding, steadier. But there was something new in it, a quality I could not name until later, when I had time to think. It was the sound of a woman choosing to say words she had not been forced to say. The treaty required the ceremony. The treaty did not require sincerity. And yet the words she spoke carried the weight of sincerity the way a bridge carries weight. Because it was built to, because that was its purpose, because the alternative was falling. She finished, the hall was silent. The officiant turned to me. "Consort, speak the bond." I spoke it. 12 lines. I had memorized them in an hour, but I had understood them in the 5 hours I spent in a crawl space under the east wing recalibrating a shield generator, so that the woman I had married could sleep without a hum in her walls. The words were about recognition, not love, not desire, not ownership. I see you. I see what you carry. I see the weight of the throne and the weight of the choices you did not make and the weight of the ones you did. I will stand where I am placed, but I will not vanish. I will be here when you turn around. I spoke them in Kithari. The vowels sat differently in my mouth than in hers, further back, slightly rougher, the accent imperfect, but the cadence was precise, because I had practiced until precision was instinct. The words filled the dome the way water fills a vessel, completely, without waste, finding every corner of that enormous acoustic space and settling into it as though they had always been there. I finished. The silence held for 3 heartbeats. Then Siren did something that was not in the protocol. She turned to face me, not the court, not the officiant, not the 7 delegations or the press corps or the gallery filled with every person of consequence in the protectorate. Me. She turned her whole body and looked at me with the amber eyes that had looked through me at the wedding, and looked past me in the corridors, and refused to look at me in the garden, and held mine for one unguarded moment in her study. "The protocol office did not summon you," she said. Her voice was quiet, but the hall's acoustics carried every syllable to every seat. "No. The doors were sealed." "Yes. How did you get here?" "I fixed the door." Something happened to her face. Not a smile, it was too raw for a smile, too sudden, too close to the surface for the architecture of 31 years of composure to contain it. It was recognition. The word that Kale had told me I did not understand. The word that was carved into the cerulean altar in silver script. The word that meant in Kithari not I love you but I see what you are. And what you are is real, and what you are is here. She reached out and placed her hand over mine on the altar stone. It was the first time she had touched me since the wedding, when the officiant had placed her hand in mine for the binding, and she had withdrawn it the moment the gesture was complete. Her skin was cool. The Kithari ran 3 degrees below Terran baseline, and her hand was steady, and the weight of it was so slight that a man who was not paying attention might have missed it entirely. But I was paying attention. I had been paying attention for 14 months. Attention was the one thing I had never been forbidden to give. Recognized, she said, not to the court, not to the officiant, not to the record, to me. One word spoken into the acoustic perfection of the Hall of Voices, carried to every seat, every gallery, every recording device, every delegate from 7 allied worlds. In the front row, Steward Kale closed his ledger. His face was the face of a man watching an architecture he had built over 31 years, rearranged in a single word by a woman he thought he had shaped. In the gallery, Meven, junior archivist, lower house, gray-green eyes pressed both hands over her mouth and did not make a sound, because the sound she wanted to make was not appropriate for a formal ceremony. But her eyes made it for her. Her eyes said everything a ceremony would not permit a voice to say. Behind us, the officiant placed a hand on the altar stone and spoke the closing benediction. The compact held. The bond was renewed, not by the treaty, not by the protocol office, not by the 31 years of tradition that Kale had weaponized, but by a woman who had looked at the human standing beside her and for the first time chose to see him. The court dispersed in slow, orderly waves. Delegates moved toward the reception chambers. Guards resumed their posts. Protocol officers began the careful documentation of every word spoken, every gesture made. The Hall of Voices emptied like a theater after the final act, the audience carrying the ending with them into the corridors, unable to set it down. Siren did not move from the altar. I did not move from her side. When the hall was nearly empty, only the officiant gathering her vestments and 2 guards standing at ceremonial rest by the doors, she spoke again, still facing forward, still with her hand over mine on the altar stone. 14 months, she said. Yes. You obeyed everything. I did. Every prohibition, every parallel corridor, every meal eaten alone, every function where you stood behind my shoulder like a shadow I was trying not to cast. Yes. Why? Because the peace required it, and because obedience was the only language the palace understood. I did not have the authority to speak any other. And today, I considered the question the way I considered a component under repair, carefully, without rushing, respecting the thing's design before deciding what it needed. Today, the piece required something different. Today, obedience to the system meant betraying the person the system was supposed to serve. So I stopped obeying the system and started obeying the truth. She was quiet for a moment. The light from the high windows moved across the cerulean altar, catching the silver script, turning the blue stone pale and luminous. The veil tree scent drifted in from somewhere, the garden, the open corridors, the wind finding its way into the oldest rooms the way it always had. I would like, she said and paused, and I could hear the careful architecture of a lifetime of court training fighting with something underneath it. Something unscripted, unprotocoled, built from the raw material of a woman deciding, for the first time, to speak without the mask, to hear about the shield generator. The resonator was out of calibration. It was producing a harmonic variance in the secondary. Not the technical explanation. She turned her head just slightly, enough that I could see the edge of her expression, the edge where the mask ended and the person began. I want to know why you fixed it. Because you could hear it, and because nobody else was going to. You fixed something in my chambers, something I had to live with. Something I had stopped mentioning because mentioning it would require asking someone for help, and asking someone for help would mean admitting that the palace was failing me. You fixed it without being asked. Yes. Why does that matter to you? I turned the answer over in my mind. There were many versions of it, the pragmatic version, the dutiful version, the version that invoked my training and my nature and the particular satisfaction an engineer takes in identifying a fault and correcting it. All true, none sufficient. Because I am your consort, I said, not the treaties, not the protocol offices, not Kale's, yours, and a consort who hears that the person he is bound to cannot sleep at night and does nothing about it is not a consort. He is exactly what Kale said I was. Furniture. Her hand tightened on mine. Not a squeeze, nothing so deliberate. A reflex, the way a hand tightens on a rope when the ground shifts underfoot. Walk with me, she said. Not an order, the first request she had ever made of me. We walked, not through the consort's parallel corridors, not through the East Service passages that kept me invisible, through the main hall, side by side, past the guards who straightened at their posts, past the staff who paused and stared, past the portrait gallery where 19 generations of Kithori sovereigns watched from their frames with expressions that ranged from stern to serene, to something I chose to read as recognition. We walked through the cerulean walk, where the veil petals drifted down around us like slow, silent witnesses, and the scent of cold rain and distant wood smoke hung in the late afternoon air. At the end of the walk, she stopped. She faced the balustrade, the same balustrade where she had stood 2 days ago, her back to me, her hands tight on the stone, telling me that what she wanted had never been the relevant variable. I have been cruel to you, she said. You have been in pain. That is not an excuse. No, but it is an explanation, and an explanation is not the same as a justification. It is the first step toward something better. She turned. She looked at me fully, directly, without the mask, without the protocol, without the architecture that the court and Kale and 31 years of sovereign training had built around her. I was told you were a clause, she said, a provision, a body assigned to a function. They told me you were not real, not a person with a name and a history and a reason for standing where you stood. They told me that, and I believed them, because believing them was easier than admitting that I had been given a partner I had not chosen and was too proud to see. And now, her eyes, amber, old resin, held the warmth I had first seen in her study, the warmth she kept behind the exhaustion and the architecture and the years. It was not love, not yet. It was the thing that comes before love, the foundation on which love is built when both people are patient and careful, and honest with each other about the distance still to travel. Recognition. Now, she said, I would like to know your name, not consort Hale, not the treaty provision, the name your mother gave you. Declan. She tested it. The Kithori inflection turned the second syllable slightly upward, giving it a weight the English pronunciation did not carry, shaping it into something that belonged in her mouth. She said it again, quietly, learning its edges. Declan, a pause. I see you. I stood in the cerulean walk with the blue petals falling and the afternoon light turning the stone balustrade pale gold, and I looked at the woman I had married 14 months ago and was only now meeting for the first time. Her eyes were wet. Not crying. The Kithori did not cry the way humans did. Their eyes grew luminous, the amber deepening to a rich liquid gold, as though the emotion was not water but light finding its way to the surface. I did not reach for her. She did not reach for me. That would come later, or it would not, and either way it would be chosen, not compelled, not contractual, not a clause in a document drafted by exhausted diplomats at the end of a war neither of us had started. but I placed my hand on the balustrade next to hers, close enough that the edges of our fingers nearly touched, and she did not move hers away. The veil petals fell around us, blue and quiet, and the palace, for the first time in 14 months, felt like a place where I was permitted to stand. Not behind her, not beside a pillar, not in a corridor designed to keep me invisible. Beside her,